Eric, let me ask you about that cluster. You're on the other, I mean, you represent many of the buildings and you see the rents go up and down. Is there feasibility for a manufacturing district in the heart of this multi-million-dollar air right area?
I think it would be difficult to maintain. I think there's a lot of other pressures. The reality is
Tell them, what are the pressures?
Other pressures are is this work? Can you hear me? Yes, no? Okay. Typically, they try to silence me in these things. That's why I have this. I bring my own, actually. Well, I think the other pressures are, look, you're dealing with an area that's really well located in New York City. You have some of the major transit hubs are basically sitting right next to it. You have a number of subways basically sitting right there. Times Square in the theater district is very close by. If you think that there are fun things going on at Madison Square Garden, not so much last night, but maybe tomorrow, that might be a place you might be interested in going. So I think it's really well located, and the reality is the rents there are relatively inexpensive compared to a lot of the other places in New York which don't have the same proximity to transportation. So those people want to come into the district. You've seen 20 hotels basically, pop up in our district over the last, I guess, 5 years.
It's amazing. It is amazing.
And why? It's because Times Square is sitting right just to the north. I mean, that's the reality is people want to go, tourists want to come into Times Square. I know we don't. That's not me staying there. But tourists want to come and stay in Times Square. They're able to do so in hotel rooms that are rather inexpensive compared to maybe hotels right in Times Square, and it gives you an opportunity. I think the other pressures are seeing a residential pressure. You're seeing residential buildings. I mean, coming to the west, there's a number on 37th Street. You have a number on 42nd, all by the water.
Right.
Look, that's pressure of people coming because look, they can get to work no matter where they work in Manhattan from that area, and that's a big advantage. I can tell you that I recently moved downtown by the Trade Center. And because of the express trains, I actually get to work faster, and I live 30 blocks south of where I used to work. So that transportation is really key, and I think that's the one thing that is a real bonus in terms of what we have, but at the same time, it puts pressure in terms of other people who want to occupy the area.
And the rents go up.
That's right. I mean, the rents go up.
Can I ask you, what is the average foot space or foot plan for a garment person coming in to, say, 40th Street? How much do they need? 1,000 square feet, 15,000?
For what kind of spaces? Then you're talking about showroom space, you're talking about manufacturing space?
Showroom. Say manufacturing and showroom.
I think manufacturing, you're going to see rents. The lowest I've heard is about $14.50. I think that they run up to close to $20 a foot.
$20 a foot.
For strictly manufacturing space, that'll be side street buildings, generally running from 35th, 36th, 37th, 38th, 39th. Probably the cheaper rents will be between 8th and 9th for the most part. Pretty much. On the showroom side, look, you're looking at expensive rents that could potentially be easily into the 40s. Those are avenue buildings. Generally, some of those buildings are better quality. Certainly, they're taller, so the views are nicer, the light is better. And then for just kind of general office on the avenues, you're still probably in anywhere from $25 to about $35 a foot range.
Does everybody have that perspective? I know I pay much more just up the block, but it's...
You have beautiful space.
Yeah. Madeline, I'd like to ask you, is it possible to create a new model for this district? I mean, is that really in the cards for us?
Hello, can you hear me?
Oh, I don't think yours is working either.
I have no light, so...
Do you want to pass this?
That's great. Pass it down.
Couldn't be further apart.
Yeah.
Thank you. Just repeat the question one more time.
Well, I wanted to know if it's really, I know this sounds Pollyannish, is it possible to create a new model for a creative district? Can there be a new model for this garment center? Is that viable at all?
I think that it's important that we do have a new model for the garment center because I think the alternative to that is
Elaborate. That's great.
No garment center. There is certainly a lot of factory space that you will find outside the garment center, particularly in Brooklyn, Queens, and they'll do more stock manufacturing. But in terms of the ability to attract emerging designers and the recognition of this administration that emerging designers are really the key to keeping design and fashion in New York, we do have to figure out how to keep some sort of core business. But it's not necessarily the city that has to figure this out. It's everybody collectively that has to figure this out. And there are a lot of pieces to this. There's the pressure on the real estate. Joe, you stopped a little bit short of saying what the resolution was, and that's because I think whereas you have all these entrepreneurs in the Garment Center, you don't really have a collective voice in the Garment Center. You have a lot of designers, and some of them are
very true.
struggling, and some of them aren't struggling, and a lot of the times that the designers are not struggling, they move out of the Garment Center because it doesn't necessarily fit their idea of who they are. And then you have a lot of the manufacturers who are not necessarily knowing where next year's business is coming from. So you have the whole issue of stability. And so it is about cost of space, but it's also about what am I able to plan for next year? How much expansion can I do? How many people can I hire? What is my business going to look like? What designers are going to be outsourcing next year? So there's so many questions here, more questions than there are answers. So the best answer that I can give you, Stan, is that it's going to take the property owners, it's going to take the manufacturers, it's going to take the designers, and it's going to take the city and anybody else who would like to help, because if there is no demand, and then the Garment Center is not going to survive. So the demand has to be there, stability has to be there, a recognition by everybody that this place is important has to be there. I agree with Yoli. There is a sense around that people are starting to think about made in America, made in New York, but there has to be a growing ambition that made in America and made in New York is important. And so it's also up to the consumer. I know that I'm not perfect, certainly. What I'm wearing is not made in New York, but I do now look at my labels a lot more carefully, and I have a tendency to be a lot more conscious about that. So I do think this is going to be a big effort by a lot of entities, and it's going to take all of us to figure this out.
I'm going to get back to that Made in New York thing in a minute, but Adam, I just want to ask you, the zoning in 1987 was very controversial. There are people who, I happened to be on Committee Board 5 when that went through. What is going to happen with real estate here? How do you think the city will help us?
Am I on?
Yeah.
Can you guys hear me
Oh,
without
yeah,
that?
yeah.
Okay, then keep the mic.
You're good.
Let me just reflect on a bunch of
Absolutely,
things that have
absolutely,
said that go to that
absolutely.
point. I mean, we have kind of a unique moment in history now for a lot of reasons that have already been described.
That's right.
First of all, to go back to what Yoli was saying, there's a change in consumer behavior going on. People want to buy local. They want to do it both because of design and sustainability. And I guess my commercial is, if you want to see some proof of that, go to madeinnyc.org, which is a website that has 800 local manufacturers on it, because they all want to start sourcing locally. This is, if not a crisis, this is a unique moment in history also because of the real estate situation. And I hate to quote Rahm Emanuel, but never miss an opportunity to capitalize on a crisis. And this is the lowest we're going to see rents. This is the lowest we're going to see land costs for the duration, right? So now's our time. Remember the schematic that Jerome had up here of that building with different uses on it, and there was retail on the ground floor, and there was production and design, and there was some non-apparel? That mixed-use nature of the community, which the zoning was intended to preserve,
Right.
Is what gives New York its competitive advantage, right? It's the diversity of all those uses that stimulates creativity, and that's what gives New York its edge. So how do we preserve those type of mixed-use buildings? And the truth is, the zoning doesn't do it anymore.
No.
I think it did it fabulously. People don't give it credit for a long period of time. The fact that there's thousands of production jobs still in Midtown Manhattan is kind of incredible. But we've got to come up with a new model. And I think what you need to do is take that building and imagine that it's now owned by the industry. And that the only way that we can really assure that the industry is preserved in a mixed-use environment is through ownership. And let me tell you, that may sound far-fetched, but it's done every day with the woodworkers in Greenpoint, with designers in Gowanus, and at the Brooklyn Navy Yard, where there's hundreds of companies that are sort of all interacting and benefiting from having a manager that is driven by the well-being of his tenants. Imagine that you have some businesses that are growing, some are shrinking, and they can all go to the building owner and say, you know, I need to reconfigure my space. I don't want to move. I want to stay in the garment center. And he works with them to do that. And sometimes private owners do it, but imagine it was the norm. And imagine that same building owner also arranged panel discussions on organic fabrics, installed the latest, data communications technology, arranged for buyers to come to the building. Imagine you had a benevolent owner that was really fostering and supporting the industry. That's the model I think that we need to move to. Thank you. I would just add it's going to cost some money. And
that would be my next question
Yeah.
is, who should get behind this? The city, the government?
everyone, this goes back to Madeline, but the way the government's going to have to chip in, the property owners are going to have to chip in, and they may feel it's unfair because they've already borne the brunt of this in some sense. But, I'd ask them, what price freedom? Is it worth 20 cents a foot? Is it worth 30 cents a foot? Nobody walks away from a deal for 20 cents a foot. And the industry is going to have to chip in, perhaps through the bid assessment, which they contribute to as part of their rent. So all the parties are going to have to contribute, but I think it's important that we develop that vision of a stable, mixed-use, creative district.
Can that happen with the current zoning, or do we have to change the zoning?
You probably need it. You need to change the zoning, but that's part of the deal. That's part of the negotiation.
Well, let's go back to that building. I'll ask Joe. We talked about in the very beginning, remember we all wanted that one building. We were looking for a building on 38th Street, and we were going to get everybody together, and the Council of Fashion Designers of America, who's represented here today, we're going to get behind it. Would that be a catalytic moment for our industry if we got a modern, when's the last time you changed your factory? I asked you that question a long time ago. I mean, when I walked into some of the factories along the side streets and I saw the same bathrooms I saw 50 years ago. The same John.
We have upgraded our bathrooms.
All right.
I don't know if it's a building, and I get confused when I hear that we are upgrading the facilities. The upgrade that's needed is there are new windows, new bathrooms, and a coat of paint. And you're talking about, for a medium to large size factory, that's anywhere from $30,000 to $80,000. That's not a significant enough number to have a wholesale change in zoning. I think when we talk about upgrade, we're talking about making sure that the activity remains, because I'm sympathetic to the landlord's plight. The landlord is saying, I'm getting $15 per foot for a factory space. If I clean it up, if I install new floors, if I make it modern with reasonable upgrades, I can command $25 to $30 per foot. When they make that move for upgrading, they then say, I don't want factory use. Factory use, regardless if the prospective tenant for this upgraded space will pay $25 per foot. Factory use is a dense application. That means there are a lot of people in that factory, whereas an office use has relatively low head count. Factory use, you ride the elevators when the bell rings, so the elevator gets crowded. Office use, you get your coffee, you come in, you leave. You don't crowd the elevators at any one particular time. So it's really the nature of the use that I think landlords find misaligned and inconsistent with upgrading the building. And that really is a problem. That is, I'd say, half of our problem.
Do you feel that way, Eric?
I'm not sure I understand, Joe. Are you suggesting that? I'm not sure what you suggest.